kids are always there in the moment, savoring the journey. I mean, when I think about it, if we as adults fell down as much as the kids did when they were first starting to walk, like we may not have made it.
Bonjour, welcome to Wide Walls, a podcast where inspiring educators, researchers, designers, and innovators share their personal journey and their vision for creating better learning experiences for children. My name is Mathieu Penaud. I am a product manager and learning experience designer, and I am passionate about the role of design and technology in education and learning, and the humans behind it. If you find this episode insightful, share it with your friends and colleagues and give us some stars on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you very much for your support and for being part of the conversation. And now, let's welcome our guest. Welcome everyone. Today, I'm very happy to speak with Elaine Chung, a fantastic play advocate and a good friend of mine. I've known Elaine for a few years, and I've always been fascinated by her passion and approach to play. When we first met, she was developing a framework to identify play types in children and provide experiences that best match their individual preferences in terms of play styles. And in 2020, she launched My Play Type to educate and inspire organizations on how to integrate a playful practice as a foundational approach to work and life, leveraging play neuroscience to create cultures with strong cross-collaboration, innovative solutions, and even happier, more fulfilled employees. And I love that she appointed herself CPO of My Play Type. CPO for Chief Play Officer. I want this title too. Elaine also participated recently in TEDx Asheville, where she gave a wonderful talk on people's struggle to navigate complex identities, something that I know everyone can relate to. And I certainly did. And she's also in the process of writing a book on this topic. So we'll talk more about that during the episode. But first, we will learn about Elaine's passion for play and her approach to play types. And then we will discuss the role of play in companies and organizations and understand what impact it can have in a work environment. So Elaine, thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited about this conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, I always love to talk about play, so talking about play with you is like the best thing.
Yay.
All right, so we're going to start with a few rapid fire questions. So the
Sounds
goal is
good.
for you to answer the first thing that comes to mind. And if you want to elaborate, always feel free to do so. So the first question is, where did you grow up?
Where did I grow up? So you wouldn't know it, but I grew up in the South, South Carolina. That's the longest time I had spent there. We'd moved a lot when I was a lot younger, but that is really where my roots are. And my family, my sister and my mom and dad all still live there. So that's that. Yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of like
So,
where a lot of and we'll talk a little bit about that too on the talk and the book side of it. But that's where some of those kind of identities kind of made an appearance there too.
wonderful. And where do you live now?
I live in the East Bay in the Northern California area.
Nice. And what was your favorite game as a kid?
Ooh, favorite game. So I have like very clear recollections so we lived in a new community where houses were still being built. And so there are mounds of dirt. And so I'd go with my friends and we'd go ride on those mounds of dirt, just like with our bikes. So that's what I remember. So a little bit of I guess, adventure, on the edge of
Yeah.
danger, I'm sure. Like, I don't even know if we were wearing helmets at it during that time. But that sense of connected challenge, so it's like you're with your friends, you're going to do something. Our parents were luckily like around, so it was still safe. But that's probably the game that I remember the most and with like greatest clarity about like how it felt like in high fidelity, like remembering like how the wind felt when you're like chugging down the hill, to the heart of like, okay, there's a little tenseness because of like it's not smooth. And so needing to navigate that. So I remember like specifically those details. So I'd say that probably was my favorite thing to do.
Wow, nice. Yeah, that little sense of danger as you go down the hill. Love it. And what is your favorite game today?
My favorite game today, like now that I have kids, I follow what they are interested in to help me also connect with them. And lately, it rotates. So between Clue to Monopoly, so much more on the board game side, and this
Hmm.
game that we just got introduced to called Dixit.
Who was your favorite teacher?
My favorite teacher was my science teacher, Miss Schiller, and I think that was like in fourth grade. And I had that. I guess that's an early memory of being introduced to things that I had never really realized that existed in the world. Even on like we studied, I still remember the unit of like seashells and sea animals and creatures like that, and that actually directed me to study marine sciences in college. And I
Hmm.
still even remember that just kind of led on that curiosity track. So I feel like when I look back at the real root of a teacher that inspired that sense of continuous curiosity embedded with awe, I think it would be Miss Schiller.
Nice. And talking about school, what is one thing that all kids should learn at school?
All kids should learn at school. I think it
If there
is
was
to
one
let go
thing.
and play.
Hmm.
Really let go and play. And I've seen it where littles, like preschoolers and maybe up to when they're 5, it really is around play and those interactions. And then it really is interesting because I have 3 kids, 2 that are in middle school, just started middle school, and 1 that is now 6. So I've kind of seen this as it continues on with their like timelines, and see that even when you get to the 7, 8, so it's like second grade, third grade, the play aspect, this piece of paper could be turned into anything. It's not just like my big kids would say, that's origami paper, you can't use that in the way that the little one is using it, but like, you know it's okay, right? So like the true playing within that, I think, just to even remember that as they get older. Like long ago, George Land had this NASA test. I don't know if you've heard of this one, where they did a creativity test for anybody applying to NASA. So for the engineers
Yeah.
and the scientists, and how it's like, okay, the kids that he did it for, like that was his experiment. Actually, a higher percentage of them tested at genius level than the scientists that got into NASA, right? And it's this like
Yeah.
divergent thinking that is really abundant early on, and because of the natural pruning process, like some of those get closed off. But I definitely advocate, like even in those later, middle school years, later elementary school years, and even as adults, like we do need to retrain our brain to reform those connections so that we can think a little more divergently to come up with these different ideas. And so I think that's where, yeah, like even though your question was directed on school in particular, I think just in life, like needing to embed more of that playful and play based kind of mindset.
Yeah, that's funny because my next question was, what is one thing that all adults should learn at work? But I imagine that you just answered that.
Yes, just insert that. And then I think
Yeah.
as adults, we kind of like flippantly say that, oh, that's just for kids. Or when you think about it in organizations, it can be that it's just a team event or like
Mm.
some like one time thing. But the thing with play and how the brain works, it's like we need to do it on repeat, in
Mm.
order to really build those connections. And at the end of the day, it's like even as adults, like if we have more opportunity to explore, experiment, connect, like it leads us to being our best self. And who can
Yeah.
argue that, like, who wouldn't want to be feeling at their best more often than not, right? Like, that
Hmm.
ultimately is that equation for finding some joy, even navigating through purpose as well.
Totally. And that's something we'll dig into a little deeper later, yeah, in this conversation.
Awesome.
If you want more like concrete tips and, and advice to do so. What is the skill that you're the most proud of?
The skill that I'm most proud, I think, so I've had a lot of reflection time, I feel like lately. Sometimes it's just life circumstances or maybe age, who knows? But as I reflect back, I think one of the themes that constantly comes up from when I was applying to jobs out of college, because I was a biology major, but I didn't want to do anything in biology. So I landed in the airline business, to then like just how I transitioned through. throughout my own like career and growth, it really has been around extrapolating learnings from different areas and applying it to another area, and finding those
Mm.
commonalities. I find that that has been something that I consistently have done, and I'll call that a skill of just being able to
It is.
dissect. It may seem a very extracted area or specialty, but pulling those learnings in and bringing that the data side and the science side into a practical level. So that's what I feel like
Awesome.
that's what I've been doing too, like in everything that I've touched.
Yeah. And what is the creation that you're the most proud of?
The creation that I'm most proud of. These are good, deep questions. Okay. My initial instinct is like my children, but like I don't want to go there. So, because they are very important, but I think the active creation, both mental, physical, as really the kids having my children in my life has definitely spawned this desire to make the world a little better place. And it sounds very cheesy, but I think as I've continued, I guess, nurturing that aspect of it, of
Mhm.
myself, I recognize that, yeah, I do refuse to believe that the current like workplace environment is going to be what it's going to be like in the future. And I believe that for every person to succeed well at work, they need to succeed well themselves. And when we can bring, as leaders, if we can bring each employee or team member to their best and support them at their best, like we will get all the goals met, all the, OKRs done,
Mm.
and all the productivity measures that, like, there's a lot of data in there that says, like, okay, you have happier employees, they're more efficient, they're more productive, they connect with other team members much better. And I think creating this business, which really is around having this mission to have people think about play differently, like even in the
Mm.
workplace, and how to really utilize it is, I think, the creation that I'm proudest of.
Yeah, that's very true and very inspiring too. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I have two last smaller questions. What is the latest thing that you did for work?
The latest thing, I'm thinking, like, what do I share on this one? So, the latest thing, as I'm recovering from a cold, so the latest thing that I've been working on that I'm really excited about is there is some integration of this aspect of play where we're like really focused on exploring, experimenting, and connecting. But that even means with our identities. So the latest work that I'm doing is actually connecting some of the TEDx Red Rug event talk that I had done and the research that I had done for that, and recognizing that when we are not clear on what all our identities really are, we can fall into the trap of nurturing those that aren't at the end of the day impactful and aligned with what we really want to achieve in both our work and our life. And
Mm.
so I have been, yeah, creating some tools and frameworks and thinking of that aspect of it, and to help others more quickly find what those identities are, because I was reflecting, and part of this was also like in the process of writing, and I know we'll talk about that later, but realizing that, I hear a lot of comments like when folks are in retirement age and in their and beyond, saying like, "Oh, I don't care what other people think, and I'm just going to be me." And I'm like, "Why do we have to wait till then?" Right? So I will start like so the latest work has been creating some of those frameworks to enable individual people to do it, to walk through those. But when I think about it as it relates to companies and businesses, is that if individuals don't know wholly themselves where they are at their best, they really can't bring high performance to a team environment, So you really have to start with giving them space to understand that. So that's what I've been working on, is like some frameworks to be able to think through some of those aspects of it.
Awesome. And what is the latest thing that you did to relax?
Oh, to relax. The latest thing I did to relax is, so I really like moving my body and being outside. And so with the rain that we had a little bit ago, I always really like to ride my bike. I guess there's a theme
Hmm.
riding from so
Always.
yeah. So when there's a which I just realized. So yeah, when it's raining or if I'm in a rush, like I still get on the bike, like I'm on the Peloton quite a bit. And even if I don't have a time for that ride, it's like walking around outside. So that's yeah, that's what I've been doing for fun.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Those were all the rapid fire questions.
Those are great.
But I'm glad that yeah we got to like elaborate on a lot of topics, and those
Yeah.
are all topics that we're going to talk about now, and so I'm very excited about that. And one thing I would love to get back to is where does that passion for play come from? Like
Oh
I think you
yeah.
gave some elements about it, but I'd love to learn more about that.
Sure. I think at the crux of it, well, I'll do the origin story, right? Like we're in the superhero universe. The origin story of my passion for play, having my twins first, none of our parents really lived close by. And so we were traveling all the time. And I wanted to be the dutiful parent and like not rely on a tablet. I also knew at like 1.5, 2, like tablet doesn't really keep them engaged. And so I looked up all the different things on Pinterest of activities to bring on a plane and realized very quickly, like after I made everything, that like I'm like, why is my one kid playing with it for like 2 seconds on a 6-hour flight, and the other one's like 20 minutes, which for that young of a child is like that's good. 20, 30 minutes, like one thing, like great. And when I got back home and I was asking other friends, other parent friends, and they would just say that it was it's just because they're different. That answer actually wasn't good enough for me. I was like, but why is this so? And I think as my father is a big scientist, like he just has brought science always, like he's in R&D. I remember doing science experiments when I was like in elementary school, and I think that sense of inquiry just stayed with me, where that answer of like they're just different wasn't enough. So I dug into the research. Like I read those research papers. I had been used to reading research papers because of my like career standpoint. There's a lot of clinical and medical stuff that I have to understand, and so I was very used to reading those types of papers, to textbooks, and then reaching out to those researchers and understanding like, wow, there's these bodies of research. But as a parent, like I could see them existing in different buckets. So you have like one area in early childhood development, another area in play, another in like the neuroscience in early childhood, and seeing that they all were separate research areas. But as a parent, I'm like, I need to connect all of these. And so I think that was where it started. Like that was the spark of like there's more to understanding like that, like about play, about how and why people play differently. And that really was the genesis of like my play type, and like understanding like where is it that kids thrive their best. It's to find their sweet spot in play. And wow, like there's also a parallel within the adult world of like finding where you can thrive and where you're at your best through your play type as well. So yeah, that's the
Hmm.
origin story.
Wow. Yeah, that's I love how there's so many elements connecting each other, like connecting to each other, so that it really actually happens and leads to you taking action on it, and eventually like yeah, working on it and creating those play types. And that's my next question. What are those play types? Because that's something I was very intrigued when we first met. You were working on those play types, and I found that approach so interesting, and somehow it feels like we kind of like instinctively like know that there are play types, but we don't necessarily we're not able to really like categorize them or understand what that means really. And so
Yeah.
if you can tell us more about that, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, so it started with I'll say like with the kids side of it. So as I started to research it a little bit more, I started to understand that I needed to be like Jane Goodall and be an ethologist and really watch how kids play. Like play in like when they're in their zone, it's their natural environment. So as a parent, like you can actually observe and start picking up like what are their preferences and tendencies and really the lens in which they look at things. So One example I love to give is like, not everybody plays with Legos the same way. Some kids really hone in on the booklet and following the instructions. Others are really about like having, if they don't have the mini figurines, they'll find different pieces to make a figure, and they're creating stories from it. Like that's their priority. Others are just building structures and just designing, like, okay, I'm going to do it as tall as I can or as wide as I can. Like those parameters of building and that aspect, if that's a priority, I would call that like a builder. And other ones are actually just building it just to smash it. And they want to see the action of that explosion. And so stepping back and like as that ethologist and seeing these aspects of it, I was like, wow, I think before a kid can even talk, if you're as a parent able to just step back, be that scientist of like, oh, okay, like what are they touching? How are they touching it? Are they stacking things together? Are they babbling like when they're doing it and not? And that, in essence, becomes like what their play type really is. Where at the end of the day, if you can isolate where their play types are, you can find out where they can play the longest because it is where they're in their zone. Like they're in
Mm.
flow, they are creating, and they are just generating that by themselves. And to that same point, if we're ethologists in the adult setting, like we do all, like you said, like we have certain preferences, but we also have ways in which we have our primary inclination to do or to see it as. And so things like some people are much more comfortable with having a routine, and a known entity, whereas others, when you bring that to light, it is not like it's like repelled away. And for those that would be like, no, I don't want regular like all the time, those are the explorers. Like they're seeking new things to learn, new things to experience. Whereas those that are really looking at, and find comfort in the kind of normalcy, or the realists, like they're comfortable with that routine. And none of these are like better than the other. I think it's just isolating
Mm.
like where your core state is, so that you then as an adult can understand like, gosh, why is that other setting like so anxiety ridden for me, right? And it's because like, oh, my sweet spot area, just as if you were a kid, like where I can really be at my best, there's these other factors that I need to be cognizant of, so I can either prepare myself if I have to go into this other more stretch zone, or I can build a surrounding with my, like around myself, that really supports that other particular play type that I really am, like where I can thrive. So building an environment in which you can thrive. And I know we talked a little bit about like learning too. Like learning is always good to like push a little bit out of it, but I think it still doesn't. You still need to know what your core really is,
Mm.
so that you aren't putting your body into shock, if you will, like in stretching so far, then you like you don't feel as great about it, and then it's like the cycle of kind of like falling down versus like just at the cusp of it, like hitting really at that edge. You still have to know where
Mm.
you are at your core. So that's what the play types really are.
Yeah, yeah, no, that totally makes sense, and definitely I can feel that. Yeah, in a learning environment, create a space where you feel more comfortable, like a way to approach any activity that is more natural to you and more exciting. Definitely is going to make you engage with it more, and obviously like
Mm-hmm.
learn more
Mm-hmm.
from it, which is
Yeah.
interesting because when we think about learning environments, usually each activity is kind of designed like the same way for children, and it can be activities designed in different ways, but usually one activity is going to be designed in one way, or like one learning objective is going to be kind of like achieved one way. So that's interesting to think of
Yeah, because they
how
can
we
be.
could differentiate the activity.
Yeah, and you have different learners too, right? And I think like
Mm.
when we think about learning, we often just isolate it to like academics, but in organizations too, like if there's times of change, or like I just want to make sure as a team we know all our values, so we're operating on this project correctly, or there's so many aspects that you need different team members to learn, that even understanding that everybody learns differently is really important, because I can't count how many times, which has been a lot, of where leaders will say, like, let's just get into a room and brainstorm. And like that isn't an inclusively playful type of way to get divergent thinking, or really including all the different learners. Like, you're just going to get the people who are comfortable speaking up and actually physically writing on a board. You really are only going to get people who like will just say it, like is comfortable saying it even. But those that might need a little more time to isolate their own thinking, you're not going to really be able to get them right away. So even if you as a leader want to do the brainstorming on the whiteboard, I think even like providing the prompt or like what the focus is before, so that your team
Mhm.
members can like, with the different type of learning, have some time to internalize that. And then you can bring out like their best, right? Like, so I think designing those consciously is really important on an engagement level for learning. But even in the workplace, I find that that's like a direct parallel.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I remember like working on like brainstorming methods, and I think it was called brain writing. This idea of like having some time first to put down your ideas before like getting into brainstorming, which is yeah, kind of like resonating with what you just said, that brainstorming is not necessarily an environment that's comfortable for everyone. Just wanted to come back to the play types. Um,
Yeah.
just how many play types are there? Like how many did you like categorize
Oh,
or
how many did I
identify? Because I know, yeah, you mentioned like the explorer, the realist, the storyteller, kind of having us like yeah, all of them listed out would be, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah. So I've
helpful.
got, all right, so 12 play types. And I have a achiever. So they're really activated by getting to that goal or to that finish line. The
Hmm.
activator, those are really ones that do best when they're leading. They're high energy. An artist who really loves to just create, really embed that creation no matter what form. Builder, we talked a little bit about. There's also a collector. And so that person really enjoys gathering information together. And the more information, the better. And how I've seen this in terms of kids is actually like little things. Like they'll put little things in bags or cups, lots of little things. And so that's one of them. Another one is experimenter. And so
Hmm.
they're never worried about failing. And so it's actually
Mm.
like they really thrive where they're allowed to kind of not really follow the rules to really test things out, get a lot of value from that. Explorer, we talked a little bit about. There's another one, an Imagineer, and they are really wanting to not just think of things, but they want to make it real.
Mm.
And anything that enables them to do that is better. And I think of like, so I've done a few analysis of these assessments that folks have done, and you could see Imagineers that if they're in a job where they're only like they're thinking about things and only on the side, but they're not in a position to really activate on anything, it gets really frustrating. And so that's just a little taste of like why knowing these play types is really important. So then that could
Yeah.
drive you to like, oh, maybe I need to find a project that I can actually do it. Even if it's a small scale, I'll be lucky if I can make it a big scale, but just knowing that that aspect is a part of you. Another play type is organizer. So they love order and logic. So these folks would probably be the ones that you'd go for, like to design processes and SOPs, to really make your workflow go well. The other one we talked about was realists. So they really like to look at things in the real world and maybe improve the real world, but it's still based within the real world. And then there is a sensor. And so sensors are really much more on the sense of like they are super aware of their surroundings, and also can be very like if it's too loud it can be an overload. And so because there's such
Mm.
sensors on, and that can be like emotions to, like I said, like sounds and smells, like they feel a lot of that, that when it becomes escalated it can be overwhelmed. And the last one we touched on, which is storyteller. So it's like everything is characterized in a story, there's a narrative within that. So those, real quickly, are the 12 play types.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the list. And do you see often that this, because I imagine like no one kid or one person is just one type, right? It's kind of like a combination. You have like some dominant types.
Mhm.
What are the types that you kind of observed? You've observed the most? Are there like some types that are like more common, or
Yeah. I
yeah?
think I see a lot of and maybe it's because of who decides to take the assessment, right? So there's
Hmm.
potential bias there that like I see a lot of explore within the
Hmm.
top 3. It may not be their top 1, but it's in their top 3. And then, within that it's like a mix of realist, imagineer, builder, and like a sprinkling of storyteller, sensor. Yeah, so I think the main one that I see most often in the top 3 has been between explorer and builder, I would say.
Mm,
Explorer, builder. And there's probably a good amount organizer. So, yeah.
interesting. What is yours?
So mine is probably not a surprise that it's a big part is explorer. Like that's my top one. I love
Mm,
learning new things, seeing new places, being surprised, and like all of that is really fun for me. And another one is achiever. I'm very driven by like getting to a goal and goal shaping. I think that drives a lot of what I put forth. Like it's like I'm playful but yet organized in the sense of like moving it towards the goal. That's
mm.
why I wouldn't fit necessarily in the general organizer thing, but on a achiever because I'm like looking at the that end goal first. And then I would say my like if we were talking about my top 3, my third one is really around like imagineer because like I'll think of things and it's really hard for it to just sit there. So even if it's like
Yeah.
an inkling of idea, I want to like ask more questions about it to better understand, to really shape it into something. And I, yeah, just like exploring it in that way.
Hmm. Very nice. And were you surprised by it when you did the test to yourself?
No, actually, like I think what it helped was like give me better clarity of like why certain roles that I had done in the past were felt like suffocating and felt like
Mm,
it was kind of like, how if you think of things you do with energy levels, like I wanted to be like, oh yeah, this is awesome, like I think we all strive to have some of that excitement or joy within that work, even if it's hard work, right? Like you could still feel that level of energy. And then I would notice like, wow, why do I feel depleted instead of energized? Why do I feel lost versus focused? And then when I did this, it was like, oh wow, it's because like that role may not have like as it stood then, may not have been the best for the person that's like an explorer. And I could see like, oh, that's why I get so frustrated when like we say we're going to do something and this is our goal and then we don't, and nobody's like
mm.
bothered by it. And I was like, okay, that's that achiever part of it that is really struggling. So it's either I can like we talked about earlier, like I can either adjust me or I can adjust the surrounding or a mix of both.
It makes me think of also like something you mentioned like last time we discussed that I found like very interesting, insightful, and it's true I did not think of it that way when talking about play types. Is how a parent's play type might be different than a kid's play, like their children's
Mm,
play type, but not really be aware
yeah.
of that because they've never like thought of it that way, right? And so it might create these tensions or frustrations, like why do you play like that? Like I want to play with you, but I that's not like the way I play, but I don't really realize that. And so I found that very, very interesting to look at it that way and kind of maybe find some, yeah, some explanations as like, and then help them like find a middle ground. Like, what are some concrete applications like that you can think of about the play types? Maybe can talk about families first, and or like children first, and then we'll talk about
Yeah.
like companies and organizations.
Yeah, I think for like, okay, for kids, it's like, as parents, so there's some research that says like, as parents, we actually assess our kids in very rosy colored glasses. Like we think specifically positive aspects of them, but also some that are more biased and aligned to what we want them to be. And so I think really taking that scientific ethologist approach, which the play types are really based on, just observing how they are playing, but also observing how you are playing. So when you see them in like and I think especially for like toddlers, like this is the example that's in my head right now. When they're like in it with spaghetti, already cooked spaghetti and mixing it with other stuff, or maybe you see them with Play-Doh and they're like mixing all the colors, or some kids might just like keep them separate, but you as a parent, you may not want it all mixed together. Like you might prefer the it's not mixed together kid that was playing, but just to understand the delta of it so that you're actually not, so you won't go in and be like, no, 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 don't mix them. Like you might have a reason. Maybe there's only three colors in your house and you don't want them to mix it because then you won't have three colors. But I would say instead of just saying, no, don't mix it. And if they are, depending on the mental age, right? Like, or the age, because like you have like different cognition factors within it to measure it, but have a kind of a mini talk with them on like, hey, if we mix them, you'll just have one color. Is that good? Like even as simple as that. And having that as a bridge of a conversation versus as a parent just like shutting it down, because then you're actually not
Mm.
inviting in what their play type really is. And also you're kind of closing off some of the play aspects of exploration, exploring with those different materials and experimenting, like what would happen, right? As a parent, you can like guide them to understand like the consequences. I think is too negative of a word in this situation, but like what the equation is. So it's like this plus this will equal this, right? So just letting them know, so that they can
Mm.
start forming that independence and understanding within that. I think that that's where it's like an example of utility of understanding that. And you'll better understand your kid too. So it's like, I remember one example I'd given you in our earlier conversation was I did these like potted areas within a play group, and we would have the kids rotate stations, and I had the parents just observe like and take notes like at their each station, and each station was designed with a particular play type as a peak priority, like so
Mhm.
it should show up more in that station, and just to see what they would do. And at the end, I just would have them like interact with their kid at the last, wherever their kid wanted to take them, right? And I had one parent who it was more of like a physical area, and the kid didn't really want to explore it, but the parent would just like pick the kid up, was like here, and like put them on that area, and they freaked out. Of course, the kid freaked out, right? And so we had to step back and do a debrief of just why, and peeling back that he started to understand like, oh wow, okay, yeah, that was like my preference, and my type is to be much more of that activator to like, do that. And I kind of pushed it on her. And so I think that's where it helps us also recognize that we're not the same as our kid, and that's okay too, right? But being able to be inclusive of each of those preferences, but to find a way where it can live together and thrive
Mm.
together. And I think that same thinking of in the adult space, in the work space, like if we can actually approach understanding the play types, we can get really a baseline of just like understanding how people see things, right? Like there's no ulterior motive. We're just trying to really just understand what that is. Because if we just assume it's one way, we really exclude a lot of other ideas and thoughts and pulling people in. And as I think of as a team, as an organization, like you lose out on connecting those employees or those two team members with the true value and the mission of what the company is trying to do. And so you lose out, and that employee loses out.
Mm.
And so when you can find a way to really pull them in by understanding that play type, you really can align what they're good at and best at with what you need as a business as well, and have like the most broad spectrum of ideas, and a better productivity standpoint as well. And yeah, I like to say like you're happier too, like you can find more joy at work.
Yeah, yeah. And what are some examples of like playful practices that can happen at work that will impact positively employees or the overall atmosphere at work?
Yeah. Okay. So when I talked about play earlier, I really focused in on like how, for me, I see it as like encouraging an environment where you can explore, experiment, and really connect, right? But in order to do that, you actually do have to practice certain things. Like it can't just be at an offsite once a year, or maybe it's twice a year. It can't just
Mm,
be this kind of one and done thing. It really has to be embedded. And so I guess that the components of what you need to embed, I'll start with that first. Like the first one really is like breaking down some constructs of constraints. Because when I think about kids, like all this work is still inspired by kids. So like kids, they'll turn anything into anything. I actually brought some right here. Okay. Like here's one. Like it's a makeup remover pad and like a, I don't know, a foam dot and some foam and tape and a button, right? Oh, and a roll of mini washi tape. Like there's no construct of constraint within this of like, oh, you should only use a button for a jacket, or you should only
mm,
use this washi tape to decorate paper. No, like this was what was created, right? And within that realm, as adults, we actually do have a lot of constructs of constraints, like that are saying, like, oh, we shouldn't say this here because so and so is there, or like, I can't do that. Like, there's all these little things that happen, right? And I think the like that's such a big component area. Like one example to embed a practice is to actually like, okay, within the team, you can actually write like on a post-it note, like what each individual is thinking that is a constraint within either a project or any progress, like if it's a collaboration challenge, write what those are. And to make it comfortable, you don't have to talk about them at the first time because this is a practice. So you're going to do it multiple times. You can just write it down and like put it on a wall, right? Next
mm,
meeting, do the same. Are there new ones? Because now some people might feel a little more comfortable because they're like, oh, I guess this is a new norm that is starting to shape. Just add some more, and
mm.
then at another time you can like really assess it and look at it. And I would say that's not the end. Like you should still be checking for, did new constructs pop up, a month later, and do that as like a monthly check cadence side of things to make sure they're aligned. Or are there certain constructs that like you just want to myth bust, right? Like right away as a leader to be able to take care of that. But that would be an example of like with that one kind of component where you need to create, like you need to break down and bust those constructs of constraints. A second aspect in order to create that explore, experiment, and connect type of environment is really getting genuinely curious to understand. And again, related to kids, it's like they ask a gazillion whys, right? Whys and hows, and it's not to be smarter than you. It's not to like show that they know more. No, it's actually to understand, like to really understand. And I think some of it as adults, we kind of lose a little bit of that where we either like shield something that we say, or, based on our experiences, we know a little bit better. But I think to start off though with like just get really curious to understand, like not fake curious, like, oh, how was your weekend, you know like real curious. And you can take
Mm.
small steps of that, and that can be like just like actually slowing down. And if they're like in a virtual setting, ask about some stuff that's really interesting in their background, like, and it can open up a whole other aspect of them that never would have come out. Like one example I have was there was this one leader, we were on a virtual call, and his laptop happened to be at an angle where I could finally see this like picture. I'd only seen an edge of it like in other calls, but this time I could see the full picture. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is that picture? Like looks like a photograph. And then just even asking about that aspect of it, it opened up this whole story that he was able to tell that connected back to his childhood. This was a drawing that he did in high school that was based on
Oh, wow.
a photograph that he did, and this was his brother. Like, so you would never be able to pull that aspect out of it, and it gave a very human moment, even in a virtual space. So that's just like one example of getting genuine curious, but on a virtual standpoint. And then the other aspect,
Mm,
so the third aspect to be able to create that whole explore, experiment, and connect environment within play, like you really have to savor the journey. Okay, so like kids are always there in the moment, savoring the journey. I mean, when I think about it, if we as adults fell down as much as the kids did when they were first starting to walk, like we may not have made it. You know? So like so from that aspect, it's like just celebrating that whole like it's not just like they walked, yeah, like and as parents, like did we just say did we only celebrate when they walked? Like no, we were like, yay, you tried, that's great. Like let's try again. And we need more of that as adults to really be able to celebrate the journey, like each step of the way. Like, oh, you stood
Mhm.
longer. Like we really anchor on that perfect ending, and where when you think about really savoring the journey and how the kids do it, it's really about like celebrating that progress over perfection. And I think that is so
Mm.
important to create that environment where people and organizations can feel like, I can explore more and I can feel comfortable experimenting. And now that's actually what drives the connection. That's so important, I think, to create that environment for play. Like, you can't just be like, we're going to play. Like, it doesn't work like that. And so,
Yeah.
really creating those playful practices that surround breaking those constructs of constraints, really getting genuinely curious about each other on a very, very like kid-like level, if you will. Like, and I'm
Mm.
not saying it as a downgrading what kids do. Like, they're really curious to understand, like to the depths of where it can be exhausting as a parent. But it makes you pause. And you're like, you know what? I don't know why. So let me let me learn something now too. And then to like really savor that journey. Like, I mean, the best teams do celebrate not only just the wins, but like making that progress. So it's so important for play.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I really want to also talk more about identity, because there's that whole element of creating these playful practices, and then you've done a lot of like research and work and that talk about identity in the workplace and how that plays out. And I'm curious if you can tell us more about that.
Sure, yeah. So, the spawn of this is now another origin story of how some of
Let's
these
go for
things
it.
connect. But like an origin story of the identities is, as I was thinking about my own life and reflecting it, and thinking about one of your first questions, like where did I grow up? Like, so being this Asian in the South, and I'm an immigrant too, right? Like, in reflecting how I have these very much embedded cultural norms that can sometimes actually be very opposing to being an American, and even being from the South, and seeing how I actually didn't have time or like a space or permission to really assess these in totality. It just suddenly came to a head, by accident to some extent. And I started this inquiry of figuring out, like, well, what have others experienced? So I researched and interviewed close to 100 people in preparation for the TEDx Asheville Red Rug talk. And really looking at it combined kind of this reflection of myself, but then also reading this article that actually said, like, the greatest end of life regret. You know what it is, Matthew? It's it's like not having the courage to live a life your own and always living it for
Mm.
someone else, or that someone else expected you to, right? And that really struck
Yeah.
me because I was like, you're right. Like, I haven't really looked at it all. And so when I did all these interviews, a few themes came up. It was like, wow, actually, we all have had some level of this journey of identities. And what was interesting, it was like most of the people, like 99%, had not even actually looked at their identities in whole until we had the conversation. And so as we were talking through it, another kind of big learning was that we didn't really have environments where we were really invited to or had permission to really mix these different identities. And I kind of equated each identity as like a colored ball of dough, that we kind of put in a basket,
Mm.
and we just like, oh, okay. And then we just put it in. And we don't really assess, like, wait, do I like really want this color in my basket? And then, like, for sure, we didn't really have environments where we're like, oh, I'm going to take a little bit of this color and then a little of this color and kind of mix it into my own color. And the other big thing was like, wow, like everybody's been talking about that they've been doing this alone, and loneliness, the Surgeon General just said
Yeah.
this year, like loneliness is our number one health issue today. And it's not going away. And being lonely, it increases your chance of death by premature death by 60%, like just from being lonely. So I was like,
Wow.
wow, like we've all been doing this alone. We all have some sort of journey. Like why can't we change this within that, you
And
know?
it's complex. It's like complex work to like reflect on identities and like really engage frontally with each of them and understand
Yeah.
what they entail.
And we don't have, I think we don't have environments. I think what dawned on me too was like, as I shared earlier, like how I think about play, like creating those spaces to enable that. Like hadn't really had any spaces to explore it, safe places to find where to experiment it. And then if we had been doing it alone, like we definitely didn't connect, you know? And so I think
Mm.
for me at dawn, it was just like we need to play into these identities a little bit more. And how can I help bring this to our attention as a community, but even construct like how to help others to really figure out like and guide them through like thinking about all these varying aspects of identities, especially when I learned like nobody really thought of them until we actually sat down and like started going through them, right? And they
Mm.
drive so much of it, like so much of what we see in ourselves, what we do. And it was like after the talk, as I reflected on it more, it was seeing that a lot of us, when we have all these different identities that we really haven't taken into account, like what's our true core colors or aspects of it, we end up nurturing things that aren't really us, right? Like we nurture these other aspects of it that are something else that we kind of thought maybe were us. Like I'll think of like, for me, it would be like dutiful daughter, right? Like, so you're like, you stay in your job, like you don't like cause any, you don't ruffle feathers, like you just like that
Mm.
just was. And I'm like, maybe I even add like dutiful Chinese daughter, because there's that like whole Chinese aspect of that feeling of duty, and not rocking the boat and things like that. But then we end up, if we just anchor on that and not recognize like, well, that might be a surface characterization, but that's actually not my core identity. We start to nurture that aspect of it that's not really us. And so I think when we can move more towards nurturing those aspects that are really us, then we actually can work on the things that at the end of the day we're like, I left this earth leaving like doing this, and like this is the impact I have. And that allows us to be our best self, is like getting to that point where
Mm.
we can like know all our colors and have the impact in the areas that we really like really strive for, so that, you know what, at the end of life, as like we are not feeling like we live somebody else's thing or we were forced to, like we're really able to live like how we really could see ourselves, you know, but we have to
Yeah.
play into it. So
Yeah, that makes sense. And I really like the idea of the play doh, because and the idea that depending on where you are, which environment, then you bring a different mix of yourself. Instead of right now, it feels a lot like you go to one environment, you bring one side of you because you feel that's the one that's most adapted maybe to that environment. And sometimes it
yeah.
can be also like not like a deep layer of yourself. But how like what proportion of each identity do you want to bring in each places to like really feel comfortable and
Right.
be
Well,
your
and you
best
can
self
change it.
is
I think the
interesting.
first part is really knowing like at your core, like regardless of the environment, like at the core, like what are those mixes?
Mm,
And knowing that, you know what, you can take some of that pink away and put it back. You'll still have a little bit there, but like you can take it out and put something else in there. But I think first identifying where it's really you. It's not because you have to be X or you have to be this
mm,
in this environment. And I'll say, like, as I had been like writing this book related to it, changing the
yeah.
vibrancy of it depending on environment is likely necessary, because it may not be safe. It actually physically may not be safe for you to show up in every single color. And I think recognizing that aspect of it is important, but it
Mm,
still roots from like you've got to understand like what you are fully, and which identities you want to keep and which identities you don't want. But you have to have a conscious effort to really explore those and like play around with them in different environments to say like, okay, this feels right, like, and lean into some of that awkwardness, because some of like anything new is going to feel a little bit like awkward, like just like
mm,
this is, am I supposed to, like, it's like a dance, right? Like, do I move it this way or not? And but just like leaning into that so that you can eventually get used to it, or you start recognizing like, "Hey, maybe I need to like make an adjustment," right? And really being
Mm,
conscious of that is important. And like I said, or I think a part of it inspiring it is just recognizing like I don't want to have to wait till I'm like retired to feel like, I'm at my best self and living it like now I can be fully me. And I think the process and recognizing too with the research that we don't actually spend enough time thinking about it earlier on. And so just spending some time with that kind of inquiry and self-reflection, like you said, it's hard work, but I think what it does help us do is really align to where we want to have the most impact on our lives, because when we can nurture the aspect of ourselves that can result in that impact, that's when we can make it happen. It's when we don't
yeah.
know, or we kind of like, it feels good enough, like we just deviate from that. So,
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm curious because it's such a personal topic that everyone is going to internalize and interpret differently based on their own identities and experiences. How do you approach it in the book you're writing? How do you try to enable everyone to like connect with the topic or
yeah,
work on
I think
introspection?
you're right. So I purposely leave identities as very broad. Like I don't want to define it. And it is interesting how like everybody does do it slightly different flavors, but I want that for them, right? And so
Mhm.
I think as I'm writing this book, the first part is really to be able to guide through that thinking process. So, there's certain frameworks to consider to clarify those things so that again, like you don't have to wait till you're retired to feel like, I got this. This is me. And I think this other aspect of like, even though this is deep, internal, sometimes quiet work, I didn't want anybody to feel alone. So within that, with the folks that were okay with me sharing their specific stories, like I'm embedding examples of their stories within that so that you aren't feeling alone as you're walking through it. And you can see that someone else has, thought about it in this way or that way. Really so that we can move us more towards being our best. Like I guess that's a common thing.
Mm.
Like I want to help people and teams be at their best faster, and you can do that with this combination of thinking about play in that core, like we really want to help create environments that help you explore, experiment, and really connect. Like at the end of the day, we really want to connect on a human to human level. Like that makes and creates much more joy and enables us to really find what our purpose is. And as human beings, like that's been our, I think, our search and our quest.
Awesome. I love that. That was a wonderful conversation. I have one last question to ask
Yeah.
everyone. I kind of have a feel for your answer, but let's see. Which is if you could design a school around one thing, what would it be and why?
Oh, okay. Yes. There's always. Oh, I don't want to say what you expect. Then now you're like, but it would probably be
Fair
play.
enough.
But play, I would say play, but on the aspect of a design school based on understanding points of views and the journey of points of views. I think that aspect of it really can encompass like constructs of constraints that we talked about, being genuinely curious and savoring the journey, because like every person has a different journey and it's like mental journey, it could be physical journey. You could think of it as a target segment and a customer, but really embedding and understanding it, I think, is such a good skill to have as you're designing interactions, as you're designing for more play. I think that part is such an important skill to have that I could see like designing it based on that, because you can really impact decisions that are made, and when knowledge is appropriate, what type of knowledge, and then thinking about that journey and process, it almost forces each and every one of us to really think about the why. Like it forces the journey, genuine curiosity to some extent, because you can't help but like, okay, I got to dig through it, the whys and the hows and the whats. And so that's an aspect of a design school, I guess, that I could see prioritizing that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Elaine. It was a wonderful conversation, as always, with
Yes,
you.
it was.
Where can people find more information about you and your work?
Oh, yes. So they can go to myplaytype.com, but also follow me on LinkedIn, Elaine Chung.
Awesome. I put all the links in the description of the episode.
Hey,
Well, thank you, Elaine.
it was so fun.
Yay. All right. Have a wonderful day.
You too.